The table was full of delicious food, and the little girl, Ophelia, couldn't help picking the grapes to taste them without knowing a hand monster was standing tall behind her. This is a monster that eats children. Ophelia was so scared she turned and ran, and the monster chased her. And the door suddenly closed. Ophelia then climbed the chair and went out. At the beginning of the story, Ophelia found a stone in the forest, and when she put the stone in the eye of the stone statue, suddenly an insect came out and startled Ophelia. At night, Ophelia was just about to go to sleep when she saw that the little bug had followed her home. Ophelia looked at the insect before her eyes and asked if you were a fairy. After a few flaps of its wings, it slowly turned into a fairy and had a small body. The fairy invited Ophelia to go with it, apparently to take her somewhere. They arrived at a maze that had a goat-headed stone gate. The deepest part was a cave that stretched downward, and inside there was a half-goat monster named Fauno, and Ophelia was afraid to see the monster. And then Fauno took out 2 fairies, and that's when Ophelia was not afraid. Then Fauno told Ophelia that he was Ophelia's most loyal servant, and that Ophelia was the daughter of the king of this underground kingdom. Ophelia doesn't believe him. Fauno then tells her that Ophelia has a moon sign on her shoulder, and gives Ophelia a book, and tells her that Ophelia has 3 tasks to complete if Ophelia wants to become a princess again. When Ophelia is alone, open the book, and she will give her instructions. Then Fauno disappears into the darkness. When Ophelia returned home, about to take a bath, she saw the moon sign on her shoulder and began to believe Fauno's words. So she took her book with her and sat in the bath, looking at the book which had blank pages pulling out pictures. Ophelia was guided by the book, and she came to a dead tree. It turns out that there is a giant frog residing under this dead tree, and it keeps absorbing nutrients to stop the growth of the tree. Her first task is to put 3 magic stones in the frog's mouth and find the golden key in his stomach. When Ophelia went into the hole in the roots of the dead tree, covered in mud and many insects, hearing the sudden sound of the giant frog's breathing, the frog took out a tongue to eat the insects on her face, which seemed to be only interested in insects. Ophelia then took a stone and lured the frog to eat the magic stone, and she successfully tricked the frog to eat the magic stone, and then the frog's body began to deflate and die. Ophelia finally got the key, and she couldn't wait to tell Fauno, and when she got the key, Fauno was very happy, and he asked Ophelia to keep it, and then gave her a small item, and said that when the other 2 tasks were completed, Ophelia would become a princess. The next day, Ophelia brought her book for the second task, but the page was red with blood, and she suddenly felt a bad premonition. Her pregnant mother was suddenly in pain. Ophelia immediately went to see her stepfather. At night, Fauno asked Ophelia why Ophelia didn't go to finish her assignment. Ophelia said her mother was sick. Fauno said, "Take the magic root and milk and put them under your mother's bed, and your mother will get better." Fauno then took out an hourglass and gave it to Ophelia, and told her that in the second task you will see a lot of food like a celebration, but don't eat anything from there, otherwise the monsters will wake up and the consequences will be severe, so it must be done before the hourglass runs out. The next day, Ophelia took a bowl of milk, and she put the root into the milk, and soon after, the root came back to life. It started stretching its limbs, as if it had something to do with the fetus inside her mother's belly. Just as Ophelia was about to put the root under the bed, her stepfather and a doctor came to examine her mother. Ophelia had to hide quietly under the bed, heard that her stepfather didn't care if the birthing process took his wife's life, but made sure the baby in her belly was born safely. And all this was heard by Ophelia hiding under the bed. Saddened by her stepfather's words, Ophelia lay in her mother's arms, telling her unborn brother, "The outside world is not beautiful. Mom has suffered a lot. You must not hurt Mother when you are born. I will take you back to the beautiful kingdom. Live happily ever after." Thankfully, as her mother's health improved, Ophelia was finally able to fulfill her duty. While looking at the contents of the book, she learned that by carving a door with chalk, she could enter a mysterious room. Ophelia drew chalk and carved a door on the wall, pushed the door open, and found a mysterious underground room. Ophelia placed her hourglass in front of the door, and she found an array of delicious food, and at the end of the table sat a white monster, with its eyes fixed on the plate in front of it. When Ophelia looked around, The walls were filled with murals of monsters eating people, and children's shoes were nearby. But that didn't stop Ophelia from fulfilling her mission. She opened the bag and let the fairies guide her. Ophelia got the dagger. When the task was completed, Ophelia was on her way back, and she couldn't help but take the grape from the table, and the fairy covered her eyes with fear, and the hand monster suddenly moved and stood up to see who was eating the food. The monster walked towards Ophelia. The fairy tried hard to stop it, and finally one of the fairies became the monster's meal. Ophelia was so scared, she turned and ran away, and the hand monster kept chasing her. When Ophelia almost reached the exit, the door closed, and the hourglass was gone. Ophelia had to draw with chalk for another door, but the chalk was broken. As the monster got closer, Ophelia stood on a chair and drew a small door above her head. At the last second, Ophelia managed to escape and finally survived. And just then, Fauno came back again, and the only surviving fairy reported everything to him, and Fauno became very angry, saying that Ophelia would never become a princess. Then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ophelia alone to grieve. The next day, when Ophelia was under the bed with the magic root, her stepfather caught her, and thinking it was something useless, grabbed it and shouted at Ophelia. The commotion woke up the mother to plead with the stepfather to spare Ophelia, and she was very disappointed with her behavior because such a thing was just a fairy tale, then turned around and threw the magic root into the fire, where it started to hurt, even letting out baby-like cries. At that moment, the mother was suddenly in pain, and the only doctor there was killed by her stepfather. Shortly after, the baby was born and survived, but the mother did not. Ophelia's days were just ruined, deprived of shelter from her mother, from her cruel stepfather, when Fauno reappeared and decided to give her one last chance. He asked Ophelia to carry her newborn brother into the labyrinth, and if she could do that, she could still become a princess and return to the Underworld kingdom, away from her cruel stepfather. Ophelia carried her brother and ran away when her stepfather found her. Ophelia hugged her brother and ran, and their residence began to be attacked by the guerrillas, who began to attack his army barracks in full force. When Ophelia was carrying her brother, Fauno showed the sharp dagger in his hand and began to say that Fauno would use her brother's blood to open the entrance to the underground kingdom. Ophelia refused, as she could not bear that her brother had been guarded by her mother and would not allow anyone to harm him. When the stepfather arrived, he found Ophelia talking to herself and Fauno slowly disappearing. The stepfather snatched the younger brother from Ophelia's arms and shot Ophelia. When the stepfather came out of the maze, it was discovered that guerrillas had been waiting outside, took the child and shot the brutal stepfather in the head. One of the guerrilla women found Ophelia, and Ophelia's blood dripped at the entrance of the underground kingdom, slowly glowing. Ophelia, dressed in a beautiful gown, finally arrived in the underworld she had aspired to. Her father and mother sat on the throne, explaining that Ophelia had made the right choice, without sacrificing the innocent blood of others. So Ophelia had successfully opened the door. Ophelia finally became a princess in the underworld. But when the camera panned to the real world, Ophelia was still alive and soon stopped breathing for good. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.